Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell us how you got started?
Yes. I started by coming to the city to pray, actually in this very room. It was about 5 years ago. It was with Chris Otto, and he was running at the time the 333 House of Prayer. And as I came and prayed, I felt the Lord leading for me to move to the city and minister to the people in the city. And so my church back in the South Shore was praying for me. And within 6 months, God provided a way for me to move to the city. And so I moved. And then the very first weekend that I was here, I went to a conference that the Black Ministerial Alliance put on for at-risk youth, and I sat next to the Abolitionists Network director's mother. And so that really is what kind of connected us and what began my journey.
That's great. How did you get interested in this subject?
Well, I always felt a calling to speak for those who can't speak for themselves, and I've done a lot of work with the homeless, the dying, suicidal. I did a lot of volunteering with different organizations. And I wasn't quite sure why human trafficking, but I was just following the Lord's lead. And I realized one day as a survivor was speaking that it could have been my two girls telling their story, because her story was very similar. And that's probably the day that God broke my heart and kind of confirmed that I was in the right path.
Yeah, I did a training with you and Sarah Durfee back in October or so, a few months ago. And at the time when I did this interview or this training, it hadn't really touched my life, and I knew it was important. I just didn't know why it was important. And then recently I found out a friend of mine, she has become addicted to crack and is now involved in prostitution. And that really broke my heart. And it just made me realize how none of us are untouched by it, whether we know it or not. And I know you have a similar compassion for people. Could you tell me a little bit about the Greater Boston Prayer and Action Network, how that works, how people can get involved?
Yeah, the Greater Boston Prayer and Action Network is really the ministry that I felt God entrusted me with, and I felt as if because prayer is what led me to where I am, that we can try to help, we can make people aware, and we can become part of the solution. But without prayer, nothing will happen. And so I just kind of started organizing prayer walks and conference calls and agreeing in prayer with Exodus Cry, which is a prayer movement through the International House of Prayer. And I just felt stirred in my heart that was my basic calling, and that everything has to start with prayer. The Greater Boston Prayer and Action Network sends out weekly emails in conjunction with the Abolitionists Network. And it gives out information on how people can get engaged. It gives some prayer points and opportunities to join in prayer. And it gives some highlights as to what's happening around the city, or information to make people more aware. And you can actually sign up for those emails through the Greater Boston Prayer and Action Network Facebook page. Or if you have any questions or want to know more information about it, you can email me at gbpan2012@gmail.com.
In the news, there's been a lot more arrests. There's been a lot more crackdowns. People are being trained in the police forces. And people just, everyday citizens are being trained in how to recognize signs of women that are being trafficked or being held against their will. Or sometimes people are willing, but it's not necessarily the best place for them. Could you talk a little bit about that, like what's going through these women's minds?
Well, yes, I've gone to a lot of places that the survivors will speak, and you know, it's sex trafficking and it's labor trafficking. But I went to this one particular conference where my eyes were truly opened, and it was put on by Demand Abolition, and they work on the demand side of sex trafficking. And as I was in the conference, it was by survivors, because that's where God tugged my heart. So I like to listen to their stories. But one survivor stood up and said that they really don't, the Christians that have been approaching them were not helping them at all. That, in fact, they did not need to hear about a savior, because that's how they got into the situation in the first place. They trusted the wrong people. And so when she stood up and said that, 2 or 3 other survivors agreed with her and told the stories about how people approached them at really the wrong time. So that broke my heart. I actually had to leave the room because I got a little emotional, because the reason why I was there was to find ways on how the church can get engaged, and to know that the church actually has hurt. The situation just made me really sad. And so I realized that the church needs to become a safe place for them to feel welcomed. And from personal experience, I've gone through some hardships in the church. I didn't feel welcome with the church. So that's kind of stirred up in me why we need to become active, become part of the solution.
You said that sometimes, particularly women who are in prostitution, they are sort of pruned, and they are sort of like wooed and courted by these pimps and these men who then like abuse their trust. Could you tell me a little bit about that process?
Yes. Well, there's different angles that the traffickers use. And again, it's not all, I mean, sex trafficking gets a lot of the attention, but it's not only sex trafficking. So a lot of times with sex trafficking, the traffickers can know who is vulnerable. They know how to approach them. And sometimes the process can take a very long time, a year, but they establish relationship with the young girls, and they give them things that they're lacking. And then they don't traffic them until they know that the trust is there. Yeah, and so after they get their trust, then those who are trafficked, the victims, so to speak, they learn the reality that, you know, a lot of times there are a lot of older men that are approaching 11 to 13-year-old girls, which is a very vulnerable age, and they realize that it's really not their boyfriend. They think that it's their boyfriend, and they're being wooed away into wonderful places and going to have a great life. And also at that age, the young girls are trying to become independent, and it's at the time where they don't really want to tell their parents every little thing. They want to become their own person, so to speak. And so the traffickers use that as an angle.
Yeah, I myself was in my 20s when I was approached by a gentleman who invited me to Las Vegas. He said he could make me rich, help me to make $20,000 a month, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought it was like a sales job. But yeah, I think the church definitely needs to be aware. I mean, even for their own children, I think I've definitely met women. When I was a missionary in India, I met a woman from Norway, and her daughter had been invited to Las Vegas or somewhere similar, and her father had to work really hard to get her back. But especially in this day and age with Facebook and social networks, I think a lot of people are being lured into something that they have no idea what they're getting into, because they think it's one thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different approaches. One young girl had told her story, and she actually was befriended by somebody on Facebook. It was a girl, it was a young girl. It was a fake profile. And the young girl approached her saying, I'm moving to your city and I want to have friends before I move there. Can you give me your friends' names? I want to befriend you on Facebook. And luckily the mother was educated and on top of it. So that person actually got arrested. But yeah, there's a lot of different approaches, and actually a lot of times the young girls themselves are the recruiters. Because they get a special place with the pimps. And so they send them and say, if we bring, another girl to me, or bring your friends, and I'll treat you special. And so, yeah.
It's just evil.
It is evil.
Tell me a little bit about the Abolitionists Network. How did you get started with them?
Well, the Abolitionists Network is run by Sarah Durfee, who is the daughter of the woman I sat next to at that conference. And I started volunteering with Sarah because she, at the time, was running the Massachusetts chapter of the Not for Sale campaign. And she was steered in her heart the same thing that I was steered. She wanted the church to be part. She knew she needed to do something to change, and she didn't know really what she could do, but she could gather Christians together. And so she started the Abolitionist Network, and I started volunteering for her. And when I started doing things with her, I told her, I really kind of want to bring prayer as part of the solution. And so she's gracious enough to let me do a lot of things with prayer. And yeah, so I've been connected with her since really right when I moved here, about 4 years ago, and it's just grown. She's given me some initiatives that God stirs up in my heart. I love the diversity, and so I'm in charge of the translation project with the ethnic and the immigrant communities, and so we work very well as a team. We have kindred spirits, and she's an inspiration to me. She encourages me. She's young, but she's a wonderful leader, and I love working with her. It's an honor. Yeah.
That's great.
So.
I think one of the things that really struck me when, I think it was 2010 or 2011, I did a walk with my church. Back then I was going to Beacon City Church, and McGenna Smargiassi, she organized a walk for Stop Child Trafficking Now. And that really opened my eyes a lot. So something like that is a way we can get involved. I think what struck me in my training is I think a lot of people don't realize that it's happening right under our noses and right in our backyards. And with my friend right now, she, I believe she said she lives right down the street. It's somewhere in Alston. And so there are these crack or prostitution houses set up under our noses. Is there a way that we can be trained to recognize where these houses are, or some kind of activity?
Well, there are signs to look for, and Polaris Project is very good. They have a lot of information. If you go on their website, they actually have a number that you can call if you see something suspicious, and they'll investigate it. We don't have a state line right now, but it's a national line. So from what I hear, I've never called them. From what I hear, they follow up on some leads that you would call if you go somewhere where you think something doesn't feel right, or so they have all the signs that you can educate yourself on. That's the Polaris Project.
So there is so much exciting stuff going on.
Yes,
what are your hopes and visions for Boston and for the Christian community?
My hopes and vision is that Christians will know how to make a safe place for people to come, and that we will see freedom and justice in our day. It is exciting to hear Jasmine's story. Jasmine has told her story, and it brings me to tears every time. I've heard it several times, and she's working with the mayor, and she also has a ministry, Bags of Hope. And so I would like to see the brokenness in the church first broken. First,
yes.
People in the church need to be free in order for us to bring the light to the dark places. And so there's a lot that we say we're taking care of what's out there, but actually human trafficking is a result of broken systems, and those broken systems are not just out there, they're inside the church. And so my hope is that God uses this to stir things up so that the church will become whole first, and then we can go out and bring the light of Christ to those who don't know him, who are in the darkness.
I absolutely agree with you. I do a lot of street evangelism and evangelism on the train, and I talk to a lot of people, and I invite them to church, and a lot of them are homeless, a lot of them are on the fringe, I guess you could say, and I wonder, is our church a place where the homeless and people who are disenfranchised could feel welcome? And I'm sad to say I don't necessarily feel like that's the case. We do have a lot of work to do in our church as a body, and to be able to make people feel loved and welcome and safe, regardless of what their background is.
Yeah.
Did you want to share scripture with us?
Isaiah 58, verse 6. So, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry, and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear, and your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jenny.
Thank you.
We'll have a link below that you can connect to find different ways that you can pray for and support the work that's going on here in the Boston area. Thank you so much for joining us, and